On the face of it, Greedfall should be a game that I thoroughly enjoy. For one thing, it's an RPG, which is my favourite genre, and it also draws influences from some of my favourite games, such as Skyrim, Fable, and Dragon Age. In fact, looking at the mechanics and the style of the game, you could say that this is Fable versus Dragon Age. One, it's got the sort of era that I associate with Fable, 17th century European, and it's also got many mechanics that you would see in a BioWare, especially a Dragon Age game. Combat mechanics draw heavily upon what you would find in Dragon Age Origins and the rest of that series. More particularly in Dragon Age Origins, because I feel the pause menu inside of combat is quite important in Greedfall. You can set up certain attacks and also plant traps, and also communicate with the rest of your team. However, it also does draw a few things from Fable. Slashing with your sword feels very much like that game, as well as the dodge. And also, you've got one button to fire off a pistol like you did in Fable. You can also say it's a little bit akin to The Witcher 3, but the combat's a little bit slower than I would associate with The Witcher. And for some reason, one of the main things that I didn't like about the combat, which The Witcher 3 doesn't have, is that if you launch an attack as your enemy is attacking, you can't interrupt that attack. For some reason, the enemy always seems to win, and this especially happens in boss fights. Needless to say, this will be more of an impressions video than a review, mainly because, for one, I haven't completed the game or got to a satisfying level in the game that I feel would give a good review. I'm only 5 hours in, and for me, I'm pretty much at the point where I'm done. Greedfall, for me, is very tedious. The combat's okay, it's passable, and it develops as you go on and unlock more skills, obviously, as any RPG would. But it's the navigation and the level design of the world which really, for me, just doesn't work. It's very, very tedious. That is the word that I would associate with Greedfall. Tedious. And it's a shame, because there's some great stories within Greedfall, some fantastic stories. Just little side quests here and there, and the main quest in particular is quite intriguing. And it's something that actually, if I picked up a book today, would be something that I would like to read about. For me, the world feels very empty. Going from point A to point B and going through a quest, it just feels very bare. Yes, there are things around the world that you can attack, places to explore, but I just didn't find those elements fun. And I think the Greedfall does focus heavily on its story, and not too much on packing the world out with interesting events. From a technical standpoint, the graphics are pretty decent. I'm playing on Ultra here for most of this footage. I did switch to high just to increase the performance slightly. On Ultra, on my ultra-wide monitor, I was getting around 50 to 60 FPS. When I whacked it to high, it was around, the high 50s to low 60s. So there was a bit of increase in performance and not a great difference in graphic fidelity. Also, audio is pretty much on point. The swords and everything in the combat sounds really good, sounds punchy, sounds like you're hitting something, and the feedback that you get from those attacks as well feels really, really nice. The music is fantastic as well. I really enjoy the tracks in this game. Some of its implementation within combat and walking around the world isn't quite right. Some of the tracks are very epic and cinematic for just wandering around the map. I'd prefer more of a wandering type music, like what you get in Skyrim, etc. But I did spend actually the first 5 minutes of the game just in the starting menu, listening to the tracks that were playing and absorbing the feel of that music, and it kind of set me up for Greedfall, and I think the music does go very hand in hand with the themes of the game. Greedfall's main strength is its story. The main quest line is, for me, very, very intriguing, and it's the sort of thing I would read about in any non-fiction book out there. It's what I would go for, that fantasy type story. It really does intrigue me. Unfortunately, the tedious nature of getting to there is what is really putting me off this game, and to be honest, at this point in time, I'm done after 5 hours. I don't think I can play much more of Greedfall at this point. It's something I hopefully will dip back into, because I do want to know how that story progresses, but for now, I'm pretty much done, and that's a shame. And I don't have a lot of time on my hands to fully involve myself in these types of games, so they really do have to catch me and take hold of me with all of their elements combined, and that's something that Greedfall doesn't do. If the combat was tweaked here and there, maybe I would be back in, but I think the main thing for me is just the world itself doesn't feel like a joy to discover. So the game starts you off like most RPGs within character creation. Someone is painting your portrait and that jumps you into how does your character look and what are their base skills and traits. Now the skill trees are very in depth and I can see that they diverge quite a lot. Obviously I'm only 5 hours in, so I've not had a chance to explore those, but I can see that you've got a lot of depth there for building the character that you want, which is great. And you start off with 3 main builds. There's the warrior, the technical I think it's called, and also like your mage type character. The mage tends to be range, technical's a mixture of both, and then warrior is close up and bloody. It's after this that the main story beats start and you get into the tutorials for combat and also learn something about the world. And you learn that something is very, very wrong. There is a disease, a rare disease called the Fanatical, I believe it is. Everyone was looking for a cure to this disease and it's affecting your mother. You're someone of power and so is your mother, and you are off to a new island where there may be a cure. I don't know why it keeps being called as a new island, because you get there and it's been inhabited for a long time. There's big sprawling cities, lots of different civilizations there, and a lot of magical beasts to encounter and ultimately destroy seems to be the main case. Unfortunately, I think it's the start of the game that ruined this for me, because you start off in this city Serene. I imagine it being like The Witcher 2 in its way that the world works. So you start off in a segment of the world and then you move to other segments. It's not like The Witcher 3, for example, or Skyrim or Fallout, where the whole world is presented to you and there are certain areas that you wouldn't go because the characters or the enemies are too high a level. It segments off different sections and kind of splits you off into chapters within the story. Unfortunately, the first chapter in Serene, or probably half a chapter, or maybe even a quarter, is just very, very tedious. And I ended up spending a lot of time there, the first 2 hours of the game there, trying to do all the side quests, the main story obviously, to get myself out of that city and off to the island. And the level design for Serene just was very tedious, very, very boring really. And it's not particularly helped by the regurgitation of assets quite consistently throughout the world. You'll get to the new island and you'll notice that when you walk into one of the big palaces, that it's exactly the same to one of the buildings that you've been in before. The layout's exactly the same, the architecture's exactly the same, and that was the start of where I was feeling bored with the game. Only 5 hours in, I started to feel that takes the fun away from exploring new areas when everything looks the same. I can understand if the architecture is the same, because obviously influences are taken from the city that you're in before over to the island, etc, etc, but the layout and everything was exactly the same. So like I said, this isn't really a review of the game, because I've honestly not played enough of it to give a final review or verdict, which is what I like to do. I like to at least get 80% within a game before I give you a verdict on it. And I just obviously can't do that with Greedfall. What I will say though is there is something there. There is something hidden within this game. Some rare gem that needs to be found, and you need to dedicate the time to it, I would say, to find it. If you enjoy Dragon Age, if you enjoy BioWare type games in terms of their mechanics with influencing conversations with your intuition or some of your traits, or influencing conversations depending on what party members are in your squad, and romances within your party and things like that, just deep story, then you will find something within Greedfall for definite. But for me, I'm unfortunately done at this point. I may revisit, but for now, I'm going to have to say goodbye to Greedfall and move on to the next game. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have, obviously, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that sort of stuff. But let me know what you think about the game down below, and whether you think I should dedicate some more time to this game and really get to know it a bit better. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.